To our amazing viewers at Hidden Hearth, we'd love to hear which part of the world you're joining us from. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. When my wife screamed at our 13-year-old son, she had no idea he'd been recording her secrets for months. What happened next would destroy everything she'd built on lies. My name is Garrison Thorne, and at 45, I thought I had the perfect life. I owned Thorne Investigations, a private detective agency that specialized in corporate espionage and missing persons cases. Our home in suburban Minneapolis was everything Delphine had dreamed of when we married 16 years ago. A sprawling colonial with manicured gardens and enough space for our son Caspian to grow up surrounded by comfort and security. Delphine Thorne, née Westmont, came from old money. Her family had built their fortune in shipping during the early 1900s, and she carried herself with the refined elegance that only generational wealth could provide. At 42, she remained strikingly beautiful, with platinum blonde hair always perfectly styled and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's cars. She served on the boards of 3 different charities and was considered one of the most influential women in our social circle. Our son Caspian was everything I'd hoped for in a child: intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly mature for his age. Unlike other teenagers who spent their time playing video games, Caspian had developed an interest in technology and detective work, often helping me with simple research tasks at the agency. He had inherited his mother's striking features, but my analytical mind, creating a combination that made him both charming and formidable. The first sign that something was wrong came 6 months ago. Delphine started working late more frequently, claiming her charity work required additional hours. The Westmont Foundation, which she managed, was supposedly expanding its reach into international humanitarian efforts. She spoke passionately about helping underprivileged children in Southeast Asia, showing me photographs of schools and orphanages that needed funding. As a private investigator, I was trained to notice inconsistencies, but love makes you blind to obvious signs. When your wife of 16 years starts changing her routine, you want to believe her explanations. When she suddenly needs a second phone for foundation business, you trust her judgment. When she begins taking mysterious trips to visit potential donors, you support her dedication to helping others. But Caspian noticed things I missed. Children see the world differently than adults. They observe without the filters of trust and expectation that cloud grown-up judgment. My son began asking questions that seemed innocent, but revealed a sharp awareness of the changes in our household. "Dad," he said one evening as we worked together in my home office, "why does Mom get so many calls from people with foreign accents? And why does she always leave the room to talk to them?" I looked up from the insurance fraud case I was reviewing. "Your mother works with international charities, Caspian. It's natural that she'd speak with people from other countries." Caspian nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in his young mind. "It's just that she seems nervous when they call, like she's worried about something." That conversation planted a seed of doubt that I tried to ignore. Delphine had always been passionate about her charity work, but lately that passion seemed tinged with anxiety. She would pace while talking on her second phone, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when someone entered the room. Her laptop, once casually left open on the kitchen counter, now required passwords and was never left unattended. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago, during which should have been a celebration dinner. Caspian had received the highest score in his school's academic decathlon, an achievement that warranted recognition. I suggested we go to Laurent, the French restaurant where Delphine and I had celebrated our engagement years earlier. "I can't tonight," Delphine said, barely looking up from her phone. "The foundation has an emergency board meeting about the Cambodia project." "On a Friday night?" I asked. "That seems unusual." Her response was sharp, defensive. "Humanitarian crises don't follow business hours, Garrison. Some of us care more than just making money from other people's problems."
The comment stung because it was unfair. My investigation agency helped people find missing loved ones and exposed corporate corruption. I wasn't some ambulance chaser profiting from misery. I was someone who sought truth and justice for clients who had nowhere else to turn. Caspian watched this exchange with the careful attention he'd been showing to all family interactions lately. "It's okay, Dad," he said. "We can celebrate another time." But it wasn't okay. As I watched my wife gather her purse and keys, speaking rapidly into her phone in what sounded like broken Mandarin, I realized that I'd been making excuses for behavior that deserved investigation rather than trust. That night, after Delphine left for her emergency meeting, Caspian approached me in my study. "Dad, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to get angry." I set down the case file I was reading and gave him my full attention. "What is it, son?" "I've been keeping track of Mom's phone calls and meetings. Not spying exactly, but observing, like you taught me to do when we work on cases together." My first instinct was to tell him that investigating his mother was inappropriate, but the professional side of my brain was curious about what he had discovered. "What have you observed?" Caspian pulled out a notebook, the same kind I used for case notes, and opened it to pages covered with dates, times, and detailed observations written in his careful handwriting. "Mom's been having regular meetings with 3 different men over the past 4 months. They're not from any charity. I looked up all the organizations she claims to work with, and none of them have employees matching the descriptions of these guys." I felt a chill as I reviewed his notes. Caspian had documented license plate numbers, physical descriptions, and even photographs taken discreetly from his bedroom window. The level of detail was impressive and troubling, not because of his investigative skills, but because of what those skills had uncovered. "There's more, Dad. Mom's been receiving large cash payments. I saw her counting money in the garage last week. Hundreds of bills, way more than any charity donation should be." The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. My wife was meeting with unknown men, receiving large cash payments, and lying about the nature of her activities. As a professional investigator, I would have told any client in my situation to prepare for the worst-case scenario.
But as a husband and father, I desperately wanted there to be an innocent explanation. Caspian, I appreciate your observations, but there might be reasons for your mother's behavior that we don't understand. Charity work can involve complex situations that require discretion." My son looked at me with disappointment that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "Dad, you always tell your clients that the truth is more important than comfort. Shouldn't that apply to our family, too?" He was right, of course. I'd built my career on the principle that facts matter more than feelings, that difficult truths are preferable to comfortable lies. But applying those principles to my marriage felt like admitting that 16 years of love and trust had been built on quicksand. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "What you do for any client," Caspian replied. "Investigate."
The next morning, I made the most difficult decision of my professional life. I would investigate my own wife, using the same methods I employed for paying clients. The ethical implications were staggering, but Caspian's observations had revealed enough inconsistencies to justify a deeper look into Delphine's activities. I started with financial records, using my access to our joint accounts to trace unusual transactions over the past 6 months. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Delphine had been making regular deposits of cash amounts ranging from $5,000 to $15,000, always in round numbers that suggested structured payments rather than random charitable donations. More troubling were the wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. The amounts were substantial, over $200,000 in the past 4 months alone. When I cross-referenced these transfers with Delphine's calendar, they corresponded perfectly with her emergency foundation meetings. Caspian proved to be an invaluable partner in the investigation.
His ability to move through our house unnoticed allowed him to observe conversations and behaviors that would have been impossible for me to monitor without arousing suspicion. He set up a small digital recorder in the home office where Delphine conducted most of her phone calls, using techniques I'd taught him for gathering evidence in missing persons cases. "Dad, you need to hear this," he said one afternoon, handing me a set of wireless earbuds connected to his laptop. "I recorded Mom's call from yesterday." The conversation was in English, but the participants were clearly not native speakers. A man with a heavy accent was discussing shipment schedules and customs arrangements, while Delphine provided detailed information about port security and inspection protocols. "The Minneapolis facility is optimal for our purposes. Security is minimal on weekend, and my contact in the harbor master's office can ensure smooth processing." My blood ran cold as I realized what I was hearing. This wasn't charity work, it was smuggling. Delphine was using her social connections and family resources to facilitate illegal imports through Minneapolis shipping channels. "Container 479B arrives Thursday. Your fee is $20,000 for this shipment, paid upon successful delivery to the warehouse." "Understood," Delphine replied, "but I need assurance that my family remains uninvolved. My husband's profession makes discretion essential." The irony was bitter. She was worried about my detective work exposing her criminal activities, while simultaneously using the respectability of our marriage to provide cover for her operations. Over the next 2 weeks, Caspian and I gathered enough evidence to fill a case file that would have made my clients proud. Financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance photographs, and detailed timelines painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning at least 8 months. But the most devastating discovery came when I traced the offshore accounts to their ultimate destination. The money wasn't being saved or invested, it was being used to purchase property and establish residency in countries without extradition treaties. Delphine wasn't just committing crimes, she was planning to disappear. "She's been setting up a new life," I explained to Caspian as we reviewed the evidence in my study. "The house in Costa Rica, the bank accounts, even a new identity. She's been preparing to abandon everything, including us." Caspian absorbed this information with remarkable composure for a 13-year-old. "What's her exit strategy?" The question demonstrated how much my son had learned about criminal investigation, but it also broke my heart. No child should have to think about their mother's exit strategy for abandoning the family. "I'd estimate she has enough resources to disappear within the next month," I said. "Once the current smuggling operation concludes, she'll probably claim to be taking a vacation and simply never come back." "We have to stop her," Caspian said with quiet determination. I looked at my son, this brilliant, loyal boy who'd helped me uncover the worst betrayal of my life, and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. "What do you suggest?" "We expose her at the family dinner Sunday. Grandpa Westmont will be here, plus Uncle Marcus and Aunt Beatrice. If we present the evidence in front of the whole family, she won't be able to deny it or run away." The plan was sound from a strategic standpoint. Cornelius Westmont, Delphine's 78-year-old father, was a formidable man who'd built the family shipping empire through shrewd business decisions and uncompromising principles. If anyone could hold Delphine accountable for her actions, it would be him. But confronting her in front of the family would be nuclear, the end of our marriage and possibly the destruction of relationships that had taken decades to build. "Are you sure about this, Caspian? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your mother will never forgive us." My son looked at me with eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. "Dad, she was never planning to stay anyway. At least this way, we get to choose how the truth comes out instead of just being abandoned." Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Minneapolis. The Westmont family gathered in our dining room for what I now knew would be the last meal we'd share as a family unit. Delphine had prepared an elaborate spread, playing the role of the perfect hostess while secretly planning to disappear within weeks. Cornelius Westmont dominated the conversation as usual, regaling us with stories from his shipping days, while his son Marcus nodded approvingly and Aunt Beatrice asked polite questions. The scene was Norman Rockwell perfect on the surface, but I could see the tension in Delphine's posture and the way her eyes kept darting to her phone. "Delphine, your mother would be proud of the woman you have become," Cornelius said, raising his wine glass. "Your charity work honors the Westmont tradition of service to others." I felt Caspian's hand brush mine under the table, our agreed-upon signal that it was time to act. "Actually, Grandpa, there's something about Mom's charity work that we need to discuss," Caspian said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. Delphine's face went pale. "Caspian, this isn't the time or place for—" "When is the right time to discuss smuggling operations and money laundering?" I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying the authority I used in professional interrogations. The silence that followed was absolute. Cornelius Westmont set down his wineglass with deliberate care, his steel-gray eyes shifting between his daughter and me. Marcus leaned forward, his businessman's instinct recognizing a crisis unfolding. Beatrice simply stared, her social training insufficient to process what she was hearing. "That's enough," Delphine snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I won't sit here and listen to paranoid accusations from my own family." "They're not accusations. They're facts, with evidence." My son produced a tablet computer and placed it on the dining room table like a judge's gavel. The device contained months of carefully gathered proof, financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance photographs, and detailed analysis of criminal activity. "Show them the recording from Thursday," I said. Caspian pressed play, and Delphine's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the tablet speakers. "Container 479B arrives Thursday. Your fee is $20,000 for this shipment, paid upon successful delivery to the warehouse."
Cornelius Westmont's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. "Delphine Marie Westmont, what in God's name have you done?" The explosion that followed Cornelius Westmont's question was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. The distinguished patriarch of one of Minneapolis's oldest families transformed from gracious dinner host to avenging angel in the span of 3 seconds. "You've been using Westmont shipping channels for smuggling?" His voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded respect in boardrooms for 50 years. "You've corrupted our family name for money?" Delphine attempted damage control, but her usual charm was useless against her father's fury. "Daddy, you don't understand the full situation. The foundation needs resources to help people who—" "Don't you dare hide behind charity work," Cornelius thundered, his fist striking the mahogany table hard enough to rattle the crystal. "I built this family's reputation on honor and integrity. You've turned us into criminals." Marcus Westmont, Delphine's younger brother, looked stricken as he processed the implications. As the current CEO of Westmont Shipping, he understood better than anyone how criminal activity could destroy decades of legitimate business. "Delphine, please tell me you haven't involved company resources in whatever this is," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Caspian answered before his mother could respond. "She's been using Westmont warehouse space for storage and Uncle Marcus's employee ID codes for after-hours access. The financial records show she's been paying bribes to harbor security using foundation accounts." The boy's clinical recitation of facts was devastating. Every revelation drove another nail into the coffin of Delphine's credibility, and she was watching her carefully constructed lies collapse in real time. "How long has this been going on?" Cornelius demanded. I opened my own file folder, spreading financial documents across the dinner table like crime scene evidence. "Based on the money transfers and shipping records, at least 8 months, maybe longer." 8 months, Beatrice whispered, her hand pressed to her mouth. "All those family dinners where you talked about helping orphans in Cambodia." "I was helping people," Delphine protested, desperation creeping into her voice. "The money I earned went to legitimate causes, schools, hospitals, clean water projects." This is what your money actually bought, Caspian interrupted, pulling up property records on his tablet. A house in Costa Rica, offshore bank accounts, and a new passport under an assumed identity. The documentation was irrefutable. While claiming to fund humanitarian projects, Delphine had been preparing to abandon her family and flee to a non-extradition country with the proceeds from her criminal enterprise. Cornelius studied the property deed with the careful attention of someone who'd reviewed thousands of business documents over his career. Helena Martinez. Is this the name you planned to use when you disappeared? I wasn't planning to disappear, Delphine lied, but her voice lacked conviction. The Costa Rica property was going to be a family vacation home. With only your name on the deed, and bank accounts that neither Caspian nor I have access to, I asked. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as he calculated the potential damage to the family business. Do you understand what you've done? If federal investigators discover Westmont shipping was used for smuggling operations, we'll lose everything. 40 years of legitimate business destroyed because you wanted easy money. It wasn't about the money, Delphine said, but the protest sounded hollow even to her. Then what was it about? Cornelius asked, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that employees had learned to fear during his decades running the company. Delphine looked around the table, seeing no sympathy in any face. Her father's disappointment, her brother's anger, her sister-in-law's disgust, her husband's betrayal, and worst of all, her son's calm judgment. The family that had once adored her now saw her clearly for what she'd become. You wouldn't understand, she said finally. None of you would understand what it's like to be trapped in a life that feels too small. So you decided to commit federal crimes? That was your solution to feeling unfulfilled? I asked. I decided to take control of my destiny instead of waiting for permission to live my life, she snapped, some of her old fire returning. The Westmont Foundation was supposed to be my legacy, but it was always just another way for this family to control what I could do and where I could go. Caspian had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke with the clear voice of moral certainty. Mom, you were planning to abandon me, your own son. How is that taking control of your destiny instead of just running away from responsibility? The question hit Delphine like a physical blow. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely shaken rather than angry or defensive. Caspian, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, he interrupted. You chose money over family. You chose lies over truth, and you chose to be a criminal over being my mother. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Cornelius, who'd weathered countless business crises, seemed stunned by the raw honesty of his grandson's assessment. How did you find out? Delphine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caspian has been investigating you for months, I replied. He noticed the changes in your behavior and started documenting evidence like I taught him. Everything we know came from his detective work. Delphine stared at her son with an expression that mixed horror and admiration. You've been spying on me, recording my conversations? I've been protecting Dad from someone who was planning to steal from him and disappear, Caspian corrected. Someone who was using our family as cover for criminal activity. The distinction was crucial. Caspian hadn't been motivated by curiosity or malice. He'd been protecting his father from a threat he'd identified through careful observation. The boy had applied investigative principles to family situations and uncovered betrayal that could have destroyed everything. What happens now? Marcus asked, his business mind already focused on damage control and legal implications. I looked at my son, remembering our conversation about truth being more important than comfort. Now we turn the evidence over to the FBI and let the justice system handle the consequences. You can't be serious, Delphine said, panic replacing anger in her voice. I'm your wife, Caspian's mother. You're going to send me to prison? Caspian, you sent yourself to prison when you chose to commit federal crimes. We're just making sure the truth gets told. Cornelius stood slowly, his 78-year-old frame somehow seeming larger and more imposing than anyone else in the room. "Delphine, you are no longer welcome in this house. You are no longer welcome in family gatherings, and you are certainly no longer welcome anywhere near Westmont shipping operations. Dottie, please, don't call me Dottie," he said with finality that closed off any possibility of reconciliation. "Daughters don't betray their families for money. Daughters don't turn their father's life work into criminal enterprises. Whatever you've become, you are not my daughter." The disownment was absolute and irreversible. Cornelius Westmont had spent decades building a family legacy based on honor and legitimate success. He would not allow that legacy to be corrupted by someone who'd chosen crime over character, regardless of blood relation. Delphine looked around the table one final time, seeing only judgment and rejection. Then she stood, walked to the foyer, and gathered her purse and keys with the mechanical movements of someone in shock. "This isn't over," she said from the doorway, her voice carrying a threat that no one took seriously. "Yes, it is," Caspian replied calmly. "It was over the moment you chose money over family." She left without another word, and we listened to her car start and drive away. The woman who had been the center of our family for 16 years was gone, and none of us felt anything but relief.
The week following Delphine's confrontation and departure passed in a blur of FBI interviews, legal consultations, and media attention that neither Caspian nor I had anticipated. The story of a prominent charity leader, exposed as a smuggling operation coordinator, had captured the attention of local news outlets, and our quiet suburban life became a parade of reporters seeking comments and neighbors offering unsolicited opinions. Special Agent Patricia Vance of the FBI's Organized Crime Unit arrived at our house Tuesday morning with a team of forensic accountants and digital specialists. I'd worked with Agent Vance on previous cases where my private investigation work had uncovered evidence relevant to federal crimes, so there was already a foundation of professional respect between us. "Garrison, I have to say, this is the most thoroughly documented case I've seen in 15 years, Agent Vance said as she reviewed the evidence files Caspian and I had prepared. "Your son's investigative work would be impressive for a trained professional, let alone a 13-year-old. Caspian beamed at the recognition, but I could see the weight of the situation in his eyes. Helping to expose his mother's crimes had been necessary, but it wasn't something any child should have to do. "What kind of charges are we looking at?" I asked. "Money laundering, conspiracy to commit smuggling, customs fraud, tax evasion, the list is extensive," Agent Vance replied. "Based on the financial records you provided, we're talking about over $500,000 in illegal profits. That puts her in federal sentencing territory of 10 to 15 years. The numbers were staggering. While I'd known Delphine's activities were criminal, I hadn't fully grasped the scale of her operations. $500,000 represented years of systematic lawbreaking, not some momentary lapse in judgment. "Have you been able to locate her?" I asked. Agent Vance's expression hardened. "She attempted to board a flight to Costa Rica yesterday using the Helena Martinez passport. TSA flagged the document as suspicious, and she was arrested at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice would be served and that Delphine couldn't disappear to avoid consequences. Sadness that the woman I'd loved for 16 years had been reduced to a fugitive trying to flee the country under an assumed identity. "Will she try to make a deal?" Caspian asked, with the practical awareness he developed through our investigation. "Probably," Agent Vance replied honestly. "White-collar criminals usually attempt to negotiate reduced sentences by providing information about other participants in their schemes." Over the next several days, that prediction proved accurate. Through our attorney, we learned that Delphine was attempting to portray herself as a victim of manipulation by the international smuggling ring, rather than a willing participant. She claimed that threats against her family had forced her into cooperation, and that the money she'd received was essentially ransom payments. The defense strategy was brilliant in its desperation, but it couldn't survive contact with the evidence Caspian and I had gathered.
The recorded conversations clearly showed Delphine initiating contact with smuggling contacts, negotiating prices for services, and expressing satisfaction with the profits she was earning. Most damaging of all were the recordings where she discussed her exit strategy, including specific plans for abandoning her family once she'd accumulated enough money. "She's going to claim you forced me to lie about her," I warned Caspian as we prepared for his FBI interview. "Desperate people will say anything to avoid consequences." My son considered this possibility with the same analytical approach he'd brought to the entire investigation. "Will the recordings prove I'm telling the truth?" I replied, "The recordings prove everything. Your mother documented her own crimes by speaking freely in what she thought was a safe environment." The FBI interview went smoothly. Agent Vance treated Caspian with the respect due to a key witness, rather than interrogating him like a suspect. His testimony was clear, detailed, and supported by extensive documentation that he'd maintained throughout his months of observation. "Caspian, I want to make sure you understand that your mother's actions are not your fault. Children are never responsible for their parents' criminal choices." "I know," Caspian replied, "but I am responsible for making sure the truth gets told, even when the truth is uncomfortable." Agent Vance smiled at this response. "That's exactly the attitude we need from witnesses in cases like this." While the FBI investigation proceeded, Cornelius Westmont initiated his own damage control efforts for the family business. Teams of attorneys and forensic accountants combed through Westmont's shipping records to identify any contamination from Delphine's criminal activities. The company's reputation depended on demonstrating that her crimes were personal rather than institutional. The preliminary investigation suggests that Delphine accessed company resources without authorization. She used ID codes and warehouse space, but there's no evidence that any other family members or employees were aware of her activities. This finding was crucial for protecting the legitimate business that employed hundreds of people and generated millions in legitimate revenue. If federal investigators had concluded that Westmont Shipping was institutionally involved in smuggling, the entire company could have been seized under RICO statutes. "What about the financial impact?" I asked. "Significant but manageable," Cornelius replied with the stoicism that had carried him through 50 years of business challenges. The old man had lost a daughter, but was determined to protect the legacy he'd built for future generations. Watching him navigate the crisis with dignity and determination, I understood where Caspian had inherited his moral clarity and strength of character. 3 weeks after Delphine's arrest, her attorney contacted me about a potential plea negotiation. The government was offering a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation, including testimony against other members of the smuggling network. "What does she want from us?" I asked the attorney during our phone conversation. "Mrs. Thorne is hoping for character testimony that might influence the sentencing judge," he replied carefully. "Letters from family members expressing forgiveness and support for rehabilitation." I looked at Caspian, who had been listening to the conversation on speakerphone. My son shook his head firmly. "Tell her attorney that won't be happening," I said. "Mrs. Thorne made her choices without considering the impact on her family. She'll face the consequences of those choices without our help." "What about the boy?" the attorney pressed. "Surely a letter from her son expressing forgiveness would carry weight with the court." "The boy's name is Caspian," I replied coldly, "and he'll decide what kind of relationship, if any, he wants with someone who planned to abandon him for money." After ending the call, Caspian and I sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. The enormity of what had happened to our family was still settling in, but I felt more optimistic about the future than I had in months. "Dad," Caspian said finally, "do you think she'll ever understand why we did what we did?" I considered the question carefully. Understanding requires the ability to see situations from other people's perspectives, to acknowledge that your actions have consequences for people you claim to love. Delphine had spent months planning to abandon her family without considering how that abandonment would affect us. "Understanding requires accepting responsibility," I said. "Your mother has shown no ability to do that. She's still trying to blame other people for her choices." Caspian nodded thoughtfully. "So she'll probably never understand." Probably not. But understanding isn't required for justice to work. Consequences happen whether criminals accept them or not. That evening, I received a call from Agent Vance with an update on the federal investigation. The smuggling network that Delphine had been working with was larger than initially suspected, involving multiple cities and millions of dollars in illegal imports. Your wife's cooperation has been valuable, Agent Vance reported. She's provided information that's led to arrests in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. The plea agreement will probably reduce her sentence to 8 to 10 years. Even with cooperation and a guilty plea, Delphine would spend the better part of a decade in federal prison. By the time she was released, Caspian would be in college, I would be in my 50s, and the life she'd abandoned would have moved on without her. How do you feel about the sentence? I asked Caspian after sharing Agent Vance's update. Fair, he replied without hesitation. She committed serious crimes that hurt people. The consequences should be serious too.
6 months after Delphine's arrest, our lives had settled into a new rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Caspian had thrown himself into his studies with renewed focus, earning straight A's while developing his technology skills through advanced programming courses. I had expanded Thorne investigations by hiring 2 additional investigators, taking advantage of the professional recognition that came from the high-profile case. The media attention had been a double-edged sword. While some coverage painted me as the vengeful husband who destroyed his wife's life, most people understood that exposing criminal activity was the right thing to do, regardless of family relationships. Several new clients contacted me specifically because they'd heard about the case and wanted an investigator who wouldn't compromise principles for personal comfort. "Dad, you should see this," Caspian called from his bedroom, where he'd set up an impressive computer workstation using equipment I'd purchased to support his growing interest in cybersecurity. I found him reviewing an online news article about Delphine's sentencing hearing, which had taken place that morning. She'd received 9 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, a sentence that reflected both the seriousness of her crimes and the value of her cooperation with ongoing investigations. "How do you feel about it?" I asked, settling into the chair beside his desk. Caspian considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "Relieved, mostly. It's finally over, and she can't hurt anyone else while she's in prison." The maturity in his response continued to amaze me. At 14, Caspian had processed betrayal, investigation, and justice with emotional intelligence that many adults never developed. He understood that punishment serves purposes beyond revenge. It protects society from dangerous people and demonstrates that actions have consequences. "Any regrets?" I pressed gently. "Only that it took so long to figure out what she was doing," he replied. "If I'd started investigating earlier, maybe we could have stopped her before she stole so much money or hurt so many people." This response revealed both Caspian's strength and his one weakness, a tendency to take responsibility for problems he couldn't have prevented. A 13-year-old shouldn't blame himself for not detecting his mother's criminal activities sooner. "Caspian, you were a child living with someone who was supposed to love and protect you. It's natural that you trusted her longer than you should have. The fact that you eventually recognized the truth and acted on it shows remarkable character." He nodded, but didn't seem entirely convinced. "I just keep thinking about all the families who got hurt because of what she was doing. The smuggling operation brought dangerous people and illegal goods into the country. Some of those consequences are permanent." The weight of moral responsibility that Caspian carried was both inspiring and concerning. His sense of justice was admirably strong, but I worried about him developing guilt over crimes that other people had chosen to commit.
"Son, let me tell you something I've learned from 20 years of investigating crimes," I said, pulling my chair closer to his workstation. "You can't save people from the consequences of their own choices. You can only make sure the truth gets told and let justice take its course." Caspian absorbed this wisdom while scrolling through additional news coverage of the sentencing. The articles painted a comprehensive picture of the smuggling operation's scope, 12 people arrested across 4 cities, millions in seized assets, and connections to international criminal organizations that specialized in human trafficking and drug distribution. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a paragraph that detailed the operation's impact. They were smuggling people along with goods. Some of the containers had hidden compartments where immigrants were transported in dangerous conditions. 3 people died from suffocation during transport. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Delphine's crimes weren't just about money. They'd contributed to human suffering on a scale I hadn't fully comprehended. Those deaths weighed on my conscience, even though I'd had no knowledge of the operation while it was happening. "Now I understand why you feel responsible," I said quietly. "But remember, we stopped this as soon as we discovered it. Every day that operation continued would have meant more victims." Over the following weeks, additional details emerged as federal prosecutors built cases against other members of the smuggling network. Agent Vance kept me informed about developments that might affect our testimony in future trials, painting an increasingly horrific picture of the criminal enterprise Delphine had joined. "Your wife was what we call a facilitator," Agent Vance explained during one of our regular updates. "She provided logistical support and legitimacy to operations that relied on having respectable fronts. Without people like her, networks like this couldn't function in major American cities." The classification was damning but accurate. Delphine's social connections, family resources, and charitable reputation had provided perfect cover for criminal activities that required mainstream credibility. She hadn't been a victim or a minor participant. She'd been an essential component of a machine that caused tremendous harm. "What happens to the other cases?" Caspian asked during one of these briefings. "Several defendants are trying to follow your mother's strategy," Agent Vance replied, claiming they were coerced or manipulated into participation. But the evidence suggests most of them were willing participants motivated by profit rather than fear. As autumn turned to winter, life settled into routines that felt increasingly normal despite the absence of the person who'd been central to our family for so many years. Caspian excelled in school while developing friendships with classmates who shared his interest in technology and problem-solving. I found myself dating for the first time in 17 years, tentatively exploring relationships with women who appreciated honesty and moral clarity. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, since Delphine's criminal conviction eliminated any claims she might have made to marital assets. The house, business, and financial accounts remained with Caspian and me, providing stability during a period of significant emotional adjustment. "Dad, I got accepted to the summer cybersecurity program at the University of Minnesota," Caspian announced one December evening, waving an acceptance letter with obvious pride. The program was highly competitive, accepting only 30 high school students from across the Midwest for intensive training in digital forensics and network security. Caspian's application had emphasized the investigative skills he developed during our family crisis, turning painful experience into educational opportunity. "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning every word. "This program could lead to some incredible opportunities." "I was thinking it might prepare me to work with you at the agency. Corporate investigations are moving more toward digital evidence, and I want to help people the same way we helped ourselves." The idea of eventually working with Caspian as a partner, rather than just a son, filled me with anticipation. His analytical mind, technological skills, and uncompromising ethics would make him an invaluable investigator. More importantly, we'd learned that we could trust each other completely, even in the most difficult circumstances. Christmas arrived with a subdued celebration that felt appropriate for our reduced family size. Cornelius and Marcus Westmont joined us for dinner, maintaining family connections despite the pain of Delphine's betrayal. The old patriarch seemed to have aged years in the months since his daughter's arrest, but his moral clarity remained intact. "Garrison, I want you to know that you and Caspian will always be considered part of the Westmont family. Delphine's choices don't change the bonds we've built over the years." The gesture was meaningful beyond its practical implications.
Caspian would grow up knowing that his maternal grandfather respected the principles that had guided his actions, even when those principles had required exposing family crimes. Thank you, Cornelius. That means everything to us. On New Year's Eve, as Caspian and I watched fireworks from our back deck, he asked a question that probably had been building for months. Dad, do you think Mom will try to contact us when she gets out of prison? I'd been wondering the same thing. Federal sentences required serving at least 85% of the imposed term, meaning Delphine would be released in approximately 7 years. She'd be 50, Caspian would be 21, and I'd be 52. We'd all be different people by then. I don't know, I said honestly. Prison changes people in different ways. Some inmates use the time to reflect and grow. Others just become more bitter and manipulative. What would you do if she tried to come back? The question forced me to confront possibilities I'd been avoiding. Could I forgive someone who had betrayed our family so completely? Could Caspian develop a relationship with a mother who had planned to abandon him? Were there paths to reconciliation that preserved our principles while acknowledging human complexity? I'd listen to what she had to say, but forgiveness would depend on whether she learned to take responsibility for her choices instead of blaming other people. Caspian nodded, seeming satisfied with this balanced approach. I think I'd want to hear her explain why she thought money was more important than family. As midnight approached and fireworks lit up the Minneapolis skyline, I reflected on the year that had transformed our lives. We discovered betrayal, investigated crimes, exposed corruption, and watched justice take its course. Most importantly, we'd learned that truth and principles mattered more than comfort and convenience. Dad, Caspian said as the clock struck 12 and we entered a new year, thank you for teaching me that doing the right thing is more important than protecting people from the consequences they've earned. I put my arm around my son's shoulders, feeling grateful for his wisdom and strength. Thank you for having the courage to seek truth, even when it was painful. The year ahead would bring new challenges, opportunities, and relationships. But Caspian and I would face them together, bound by shared principles and mutual respect that no betrayal could destroy. We'd chosen justice over comfort, truth over lies, and consequences over forgiveness. Those choices had cost us a wife and mother, but they'd preserved our integrity and strengthened our bond as father and son.
3 years after Delphine's sentencing, Caspian graduated as valedictorian of his high school class while I watched from the audience with pride that seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of my chest. At 17, he had grown into a remarkable young man whose character had been forged in the crucible of family betrayal and moral testing. His acceptance speech focused on the importance of truth-telling and moral courage, themes that resonated deeply with classmates who knew the basics of our family story. While Caspian never spoke publicly about the details of his mother's crimes, his reputation as someone who'd stood up for principle despite personal cost had earned him respect from teachers and peers alike. Excellence isn't just about academic achievement, Caspian told his graduating class from the podium. It's about making choices that align with your values, even when those choices require sacrifice. The words echoed principles we'd developed together during the darkest period of our lives. Watching him articulate those principles to hundreds of people, I felt confident that whatever challenges he faced in college and beyond, he possessed the moral foundation to navigate them successfully. After the ceremony, we celebrated at the same restaurant where this journey had begun, the place where Delphine had missed Caspian's academic achievement because of her foundation emergency. The symbolism felt appropriate. We were marking how far we'd traveled from betrayal toward truth. IMT in the fall, I said, raising my glass of sparkling cider in a toast. Computer science and criminology double major. I couldn't be prouder. Caspian's academic excellence had earned him a full scholarship to one of the world's most prestigious technology programs. His plan was to spend 4 years developing cutting-edge skills in cybersecurity and digital forensics, then return to Minneapolis to work as a partner in Thorne Investigations. "The agency will be different when I get back," he said thoughtfully. "Corporate crime is moving into digital spaces that traditional investigators can't access. We'll be ahead of the curve." The business projection was accurate. During Caspian's high school years, I'd positioned Thorne Investigations as a leader in cases involving digital evidence, financial fraud, and corporate corruption. Our reputation for thoroughness and integrity had attracted clients from across the Midwest, generating enough revenue to support expansion and new technology. More importantly, the work felt meaningful in ways my previous cases hadn't. Every investigation was an opportunity to expose lies and protect honest people from those who would exploit trust for profit. The skills Caspian and I had developed during our family crisis now served clients who needed advocates willing to pursue truth, regardless of personal cost. "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," Caspian said as we finished dinner. The serious tone in his voice caught my attention immediately. "What is it?" "Do you ever wonder if things would have been different if we'd confronted Mom privately instead of exposing her in front of the family?"
The question revealed that despite his remarkable maturity, Caspian still carried some uncertainty about the choices we'd made during the most difficult period of our lives. I'd noticed him researching family therapy approaches and reconciliation strategies, suggesting he sometimes wondered if there had been alternative paths we hadn't explored. "I think about it sometimes," I said honestly, "but I always reach the same conclusion. Private confrontation would have given her the opportunity to destroy evidence and disappear. She was weeks away from fleeing the country when we exposed her. But what if she would have stopped the criminal activity and stayed with the family?" The hypothetical scenario was emotionally appealing, but practically unrealistic. "Caspian, your mother had stolen $500,000 and was planning to abandon us. That kind of betrayal doesn't happen impulsively. It requires months of deliberate choices. Someone who could plan that level of deception wouldn't suddenly become honest because of a private conversation." He nodded, but didn't seem entirely satisfied with my answer. "I keep thinking about whether we gave her enough chances to choose differently." This concern revealed both Caspian's compassion and his one remaining vulnerability, a tendency to assume responsibility for other people's moral failures. Despite everything he'd learned about criminal behavior and personal accountability, part of him still wondered if his mother's crimes were somehow preventable through different actions on our part. "Son, let me share something I've learned from investigating hundreds of cases. Good people who make mistakes want to be caught because guilt motivates them to seek redemption. Bad people who commit crimes only want to avoid consequences. Your mother spent months perfecting her deception instead of wrestling with guilt. That tells us everything we need to know about her character." The distinction was crucial for Caspian's emotional health. He needed to understand that his mother's crimes reflected her values, not failures in our response to those crimes. We'd provided every opportunity for honesty and received calculated manipulation in return. Over the summer before his departure for MIT, Caspian worked at the agency as a paid intern, learning advanced investigation techniques while contributing technological expertise that enhanced our capabilities. Watching him interview witnesses, analyze evidence, and present findings to clients, I saw flashes of the investigator he would become: thorough, ethical, and absolutely committed to truth. "Mr. Thorne, your son has remarkable instincts for this work," commented Detective Maria Santos of the Minneapolis Police Department after Caspian helped solve a complex embezzlement case. "He sees patterns that experienced investigators miss." The praise was well-deserved. Caspian had identified financial irregularities that revealed how a nonprofit director had been stealing donations for 3 years.
His analysis led to criminal charges and recovery of over $200,000 in stolen funds, a victory that protected donors and preserved the organization's mission. "How does it feel to catch another criminal who stole from people who trusted them?" I asked, as we celebrated the successful conclusion of the case. "Satisfying. Like we're making sure actions have consequences, even when criminals think they're too smart to get caught." As August approached and departure for MIT drew near, we received an unexpected communication that forced us to confront the past we'd been gradually moving beyond. A letter arrived from Delphine, forwarded through the federal prison system, requesting permission to call Caspian on his 18th birthday. She says she has important things to tell me that can't wait until her release, claims she's learned things about family and responsibility that she wants to share. I felt immediate skepticism about Delphine's motives. Federal inmates often developed strategies for manipulating family members, using emotional appeals and false promises to secure financial support or character references for parole hearings. "What do you want to do?" I asked. Caspian thought for several minutes before responding. "I want to take the call, but only with you listening. If she's genuinely changed, she'll understand why I need witnesses to any conversation between us." The condition was wise and telling. Even after 3 years of separation, Caspian understood that his mother remained someone who required protection against rather than trust in. His willingness to consider contact balanced compassion with caution in exactly the way I hoped he'd approach all complex relationships. "Are you prepared for the possibility that she hasn't changed at all?" I asked. "I'm prepared for the possibility that she's become an even better liar," he replied. "Prison gives people time to practice new manipulation strategies." On Caspian's 18th birthday, we sat in my office with a speakerphone positioned between us, waiting for a call from Federal Correctional Institution Wasika, where Delphine was serving her sentence. The conversation would be recorded by prison authorities and could be terminated immediately if it became inappropriate. When the phone rang, I answered with professional neutrality. "Thorne residence." "Garrison, it's Delphine. Is Caspian available?" Her voice sounded older, more subdued than I remembered, but the underlying tone was familiar. Calculated warmth, designed to create emotional connection rather than genuine feeling. "I'm here, Mom," Caspian said. "Dad's listening too." There was a brief pause, presumably as Delphine processed the information that our conversation wouldn't be private. "I understand why you'd want witnesses," she said carefully. "I haven't earned the right to private conversations." The acknowledgement seemed promising, but I remained skeptical. Sophisticated manipulators often began interactions by accepting responsibility before transitioning to requests or emotional appeals. "How have you been?" Delphine asked. "Good," Caspian replied without elaborating. "I graduated as valedictorian, and I'm starting at MIT in the fall." "MIT," she repeated, with what sounded like genuine pride. "That's wonderful, Caspian. I always knew you were brilliant." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering safe topics like academics, career plans, and general life updates. Delphine asked thoughtful questions and responded with appropriate emotional reactions, maintaining the persona of a mother who cared deeply about her son's welfare. But she never addressed the crimes she committed or the betrayal she inflicted on her family. Every reference to the past was oblique, focusing on mistakes and poor choices rather than specific criminal actions or their consequences for the people she claimed to love. As the call neared the conclusion, Delphine finally revealed her true purpose. "Caspian, I want you to know that everything I did because I thought I was protecting our family's future. The money I earned was going to ensure that you could attend any college you wanted without financial stress." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Delphine was rewriting history to portray criminal activities as parental sacrifice, hoping that time and distance had made her son forget the evidence of her planned abandonment. Mom, you were planning to disappear to Costa Rica under an assumed identity. You weren't protecting my future, you were abandoning it. The response seemed to catch Delphine off guard. She apparently expected time to have softened his memories or made him more susceptible to emotional manipulation. I never would have left permanently, she protested. The Costa Rica house was just a safety net in case legal problems arose. I would have sent for you and your father once things settled down. Another lie, contradicted by the evidence we'd gathered and the recorded conversations where she discussed cutting all ties to her previous life. The recordings of your conversations prove that's not true, Caspian said with devastating simplicity. The call ended shortly afterward, with vague promises to stay in touch and hopes for eventual reconciliation. But Caspian and I both understood that nothing had changed. Delphine remained fundamentally committed to avoiding responsibility for her choices, preferring comfortable lies to difficult truths. "How do you feel?" I asked after hanging up. Disappointed, but not surprised. She still doesn't understand the difference between making mistakes and choosing to commit crimes. As we prepared for his departure for MIT the following week, I reflected on how that conversation had provided perfect closure to the chapter of our lives defined by betrayal and recovery. Caspian had given his mother every opportunity to demonstrate growth and accountability, and she had chosen instead to perpetuate the same patterns of manipulation that had destroyed their relationship originally. We were finally, completely free. That brings us to the end of our story here at Hidden Hearth. What started as a family dinner ended with justice served and a son who learned that truth matters more than comfort, and that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important discoveries. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to Hidden Hearth for more stories where family secrets come to light and justice finds its way home. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest episodes, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from
Around the world. Remember, every family has secrets, but not every family has the courage to face the truth when those secrets threaten everything they hold dear. Until next time, this is Hidden Hearth, where the most extraordinary drama unfolds behind ordinary doors.